Mr. City Clerk, let's call the roll.
Council members Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Mayor Draymond.
Here. For the Redevelopment Agency.
Agency members Draymond.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian.
Here.
Chairman Najarian.
Here.
Okay, let's hear the item, please, at 1A.
With your permission, I'd like to read the report first.
All right.
The agenda for the June 17, 2008
You have
joint
such a
public...
nice way of doing that. I want you to know, how much I appreciate that. I'm so busy with my foot on the throttle right now, looking at the clock. And
was the way he was raised.
I must have been. Let me congratulate you and your mother and your father for bringing you up with such nice manners. Thank you.
Certainly. Appreciate it. The agenda for the June 17, 2008 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Redevelopment Agency was posted on Thursday, June 12, 2008 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item 1 is Director of Planning regarding amendments to Downtown Specific Plan, the DSP. 1A is a council motion directing staff to initiate the following amendments to the DSP. Miscellaneous text cleanups to the DSP, create incentive for museum and exhibit uses, create procedure for projects in DSP and adjacent zones, modify Alex Theater district height and FAR limits, increase FAR limits by 0.50 across the DSP area, increase FAR limits by 1 in select districts, and prepare appropriate environmental review under CEQA in connection therewith.
Okay, thank you. Who are we going to? Mr.
Yes,
City
Mr.
Manager.
Mayor, I'll go to the individual who heads up our planning design studio. I say that because it makes me feel so good to say it. Alan Loomis. Alan?
Thank you, Mr. Starbird, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the agency. This report is a follow-up to a study session and discussion that was held earlier this spring regarding certain possible changes to the downtown specific plans, minor adjustments that have come forward as necessary or desirable in the past year that we've been reviewing projects under the plan. So it's really following through on the direction you gave us earlier this year, and I can go through the items in detail. However, I do want to say before, if you have an interest in that, simply say that if you act on this report today, what you are doing is initiating the full kind of analysis that would be necessary under CEQA to prepare these amendments. They would still have to come back to you with the appropriate environmental analysis for your formal adoption. And with that, I see you have a question. I'll pause.
Yes, Mr. Weaver.
The general question, these adjustments are based on what staff has seen. I mean, we gave direction, but you're reacting to based on the submittals and the approvals, whatever been coming through the system.
That's correct. The text amendments in particular would be to clarify some of the language.
But the other things,
are largely
it's experience learned during the interim since we approved.
That's right.
Downtown specific plan.
Mr. City Manager.
This is a supplementary comment because the staff report seemed to imply in that regard that the recommendation, for example, on some of the height and density FAR limits was because we'd seen development proposals. I clarified with Mr. Hagani that in addition to having interest in development at these levels, the planning staff feels very comfortable that from a pure planning standpoint, these adjustments make sense from the standpoint of our objectives for the downtown area.
Okay.
Right, Mr. Hagani?
Okay.
If I could clarify, it wasn't then just experience learned, it's but you're seeing as we go down the road. So it's a combination of factors.
If I could clarify, just to be very clear on one item, the adjustments on the FARs is not an adjustment on the height restrictions in place or any of the other design standards. It's simply on the allowed floor area of particular buildings, if you will, loosening the belt up just a little bit on the buildings, but not allowing them to be any taller, with the exception of the changes to the north end of the Alex Theater district.
Okay. All right. Let's go to comments, some brief comments, then we'll go to the speakers, and then we'll come back to the council for some more in-depth comments. Do I have anybody that wants to speak now before we go to the public?
I just want to clarify that before
Yes.
we get into it.
Yes. Anyone? Before we get
I
into
just have one question.
Sure.
On the fiscal impacts. Why do you need between $40,000 to $80,000? This is just for staff work, or is it environmental?
Depending on which direction you'll take, it'll be for the environmental.
Okay. So that will come when? After it goes to the planning commission?
No, after you decide which one of the items that are listed, we will then determine what level of environmental review we will be required to do, and then we'll come with a report to tell you what that level would be and how much it would cost.
And you need that information from us today?
We need the information on the direction you'd like us to take today in terms of the downtown specific plan, but then the environmental analysis that would go with it would have to do some additional work after today's...
So you'll come back with that?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to the public. We have two speaker cards. One is from Mike Mulhill, who seems to have stepped out, and the other is from Rubik Ovanesian.
I have another one coming.
And looks like you have another one coming. Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of council, city manager, city attorney. My name is Rubik Ovanesian with with Cranbrook Realty Corporation, resident of Glendale. My office happens to be in Glendale as well. I'm here to speak in support of the staff report with two exceptions. One, the property at the southwest corner of Louise and Broadway. It's in East Broadway, and the surrounding properties are in Maryland, just by the name. I think that needs to change to the Maryland. It's behind it, adjacent to the street. So that's one item. There was a project approved there. That project, it's very hard to pencil out with the financial world these days, so most likely it will be a redesign project. The second, it's a more general comment, and it's in regards to the transitional area on the west side of the Central Avenue. Staff current FAR and height are the following: 4 stories by right, 2 stories incentives. FAR is, I guess, 3. And we've run a number of performers on several of the properties up and down the street, and we feel strongly. I've run the performers myself, and I've had 2 consultants, 2 developers run on several of the properties up and down the street on west side of Central. And due to the depth of the properties, currently one of the items is the split zoning is addressing that problem specifically on the west side of Central Avenue. The other problem is the properties are not deep enough for meaningful developments. And also the abutting multifamily residential. So you need to increase the FAR, not the 0.5%, but maybe a full 1% to a 4.0, for currently 3.0, to financially be able to make sense of the developments. Otherwise, not much will happen. And if I had the last item, if I had my wish, across the street is can't remember the name, Orange Central zoning, or by name. The height is 6 stories by right and plus 6 by incentives, and the FAR is, I guess, 5.4 or 5.7. I'm correct, from memory, I recall. And I would say if at least do the FAR to 1 point increase on the west side of Central to have entice development, to encourage development, because it's not penciling out. And if not, second request, if it's possible, I know the staff are not recommending any height increases, to make the currently height is 4 stories by right and 2 floors additional by incentives. I would suggest maybe making that 4 floors by incentives, making a total of 8. Just when you want to design a building, construction cost and feasibility, wood frame, concrete, steel, those come into the play where the planning department doesn't look at some of those issues.
Okay.
And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Let me go back to Mr. Mulhill because I see he stepped back in.
Thank you, gentlemen. My name is Mike Mulhill, resident of Glendale for over 30 years. I'd like to talk about the quality of life in Glendale. Every time I listen to a developer come into town, they're here for a year or two and they go home and they leave their mark. No such thing as side lots, setbacks, no green belts. It just goes on and on. They leave and I'm stuck with a 25-story building. There's no green belt around the building. So today I'm looking at in the news press, headline says, plan to swap height for art space goes to agency. Sounds good. I love art. I'm a musician, in fact. However, why must we continue growing the heights of the buildings just another floor to get some art? Glendale is a quality town today. After all, we have the Americana. That has set a standard I think we should maintain. To give in so quickly just for art, no, people want to be here. We can lower the heights of our buildings, have lower density, higher quality of life. You can put in that museum that we want, the art gallery, wonderful. But put in a green belt. We're becoming a concrete jungle. Mr. Caruso said, we don't need a concrete jungle. People want to come to the Americana because it's green. Having taller buildings is not green. We're going to be looking like Manhattan. Again, are we either fish or fowl? We can be a small town or a big town. I like to think of Glendale being an upscale town where there's quality, where there's quality of the buildings, and everybody's packed like sardines in a can. We've already approved plenty of buildings in town. Why do we need to add higher height? Why not low heights? Raise the rent. After all, we're much cheaper than there is in Santa Monica. We're much cheaper than there is in Santa Monica. I believe in the Glendale News Press, there's a company just moved to Glendale because we're only $3 a square foot. They're like $10, $15 a square foot over there in by the beach area. People want to live in Glendale. And we don't have to sacrifice the quality of our life, the quality of our life for others, for the people who are only here for a year or two. They came to Glendale because they like the greenery. They like the mountains. And once they're here, they start building height, and there's no vistas anymore. But they got their tall buildings in, and they'll go someplace else. I'm here for the long run. I think this idea of art is wonderful, but we don't need to give up density. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohit. Rodney Kahn.
Good afternoon, Chairman and agency members. My name is Rodney Kahn. I'm a 25-year resident of the City of Glendale, and I'm also a developer here in the City of Glendale. I'm here to support this amendment, or these amendments, that staff is suggesting. There's actually, as I go through them, the first item, the minor text cleanups, these are items that came out, or some of them came out as a result of some of the projects that we processed in the downtown area. And then specifically the one correction as it relates to the valet parking service as approved, or versus an approved approved parking plan, was something specifically that we encountered on the Department of Social Services residential building. One of the things I did want to speak about was the examination of the increase of the floor area. And I know that there's a CEQA, or environmental component to it. And I would ask that the agency look at a 1.0 FAR increase throughout the downtown specific plan simply from a CEQA point of view. If you decide to adopt something lesser, that's fine. But at least the analysis has taken that into consideration. Because if a project does come forward in the future, and you have done that analysis, you will save it from a timing perspective or from a processing perspective a significant amount of time. And the cost that you're looking at doing the analysis at now is insignificant. You're looking at it from a 0.5 or a 1.0 FAR. The other thing, as it relates specifically to the art galleries and exhibit spaces and museums, I think it's an excellent idea. I think it's a good idea for the downtown specific plan, and in fact, at some point when it's appropriate, I would also hope that we encourage this in our other redevelopment project area, which is along San Fernando Road, because I think there's great opportunities where there are tile shops, there are orange shops, there are different built-in components already for some art gallery space, some warehouse space, something like that as incentives as well. I know now is not the time or the appropriate review to be commenting on that, but that's certainly something we should look at in the future. I'm just here basically, my colleague, Mr. Storian, was here. He had to leave. He also supports the changes. Just basically here to say that we would encourage and support these changes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Khan. All right, I have no other speaker cards, so let me go to my colleagues.
Question.
Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Staff could comment on Mr. Khan's thoughts on the FAR.
Yes, Mr. Khan, I believe, was suggesting that the environmental document could cover 1.0 across the board increase in FAR. That is certainly something that is possible. However, we do not know at this point whether moving the 0.5 to 1.0 would push what level of environmental review it would trigger. So that in the end, it's a matter of what level of environmental review it'll trigger, how much more cost is involved, and how much more time. But if that was the desire of the City Council,
You could come back with that analysis.
we could do a preliminary analysis and give you an update. That would be possible.
Thank you.
Mr. Weaver, do you have any other comments?
No, I like everything staff recommended. That's why I asked the questions at the beginning.
Okay.
Lessons learned and just further analysis of block by block. And that's what I need to hear from staff. So I'm willing to go down that road.
Okay. Mr. Quintero.
I assume we're going to have some tight regulations, if you want to call it that. The ordinance will be tight enough that the incentives for museum, art galleries, and exhibit spaces will forever be museum, art galleries, and exhibit spaces. Is that correct? So that a developer is not going to turn around a few years later and say, gee, this didn't work out, and now I want to do something else with that space.
There are two places that we will address that. One would be the actual way that we will define those uses in the downtown specific plan, and the more useful place would be during the development agreement process, that you would approve a development agreement much in the same way that you approve one for hotel use, for example, today, to keep the developer accountable, hold them accountable to delivering on that use.
Okay, but you'll do that twice.
That's correct.
And Mr. City Attorney, that will stand 15 years from now. There's not going to be any issue with the courts as to the ability of the city to restrict the use of a specific space as part of a agreement.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, if the direction at the end of the day from the council, it will be to make sure that there's a covenant or some sort of restriction in place for a long period of time. We'll make sure that both the DSP language and any subsequent development agreements have the appropriate language to effectuate the council's desire. So the answer is yes.
Okay. Mr. Najarian.
A few comments and then some questions. I'm okay with the minor cleanups. I'm okay with the incentives for museums and art galleries. I think that a developer certainly is not going to be seeing a huge income from a museum or an art exhibit. So therefore, giving the extra incentive would make sense. I don't see many museums popping up, though, along Grand. I do have a problem, though, with all the other modifications that are increasing the FAR. I mean, we spent a lot of time on this downtown specific plan, and we really crunched those numbers, and we spent a lot of many hours of study session looking through this, seeing the impact, trying to preserve the Alex Theater, the mid-brand, as a lesser developed section of the downtown area. So I'm very hesitant now, without a lot more study as to the effects that these changes in FARs are going to give before I can support this. So I would hope that we could sit down. I mean, it's almost, I'm not trying to be glib, but it's almost comical that we just have 2 pages basically with the proposal to increase the FAR by up to 1, a whole point in several different areas without a complete vetting of the process, understanding that there's going to possibly be an EIR, assuredly be an EIR down the line, but I'd like to look at this and study it a little bit more. And you've been, I mean, we were in it together, Hassan, for quite some time. I just am a little hesitant to go ahead and say, okay, whatever we said, all the work that we did before, we were wrong. We really meant to increase the density in just a quick meeting with hardly any public input. So that's just my opinion on that. And specifically, can you explain to me what D would mean, the ramifications of the modification? It says the proposed amendment would increase this restriction north of California Avenue to match the adjacent mid-orange. You're talking about a restriction, but it's something that's giving you greater ability to develop. So I was a little confused with that word.
Let me explain that the 2 FAR proposals which are before you are separate. One was the overall increase of the FAR across the board. That particular proposal is connected to the overall standards that we have. If you remember, when we were developing the downtown specific plan, initially we were not considering any FARs anywhere. We were simply relying on all the other standards to maintain the envelope of the buildings, the heights, and the massing throughout downtown. We started entertaining the idea of FARs for 2 reasons. One was to be able to measure the impacts for the environmental impact report. The other one was to measure the amount of bonuses you wanted to give them for the proposed uses that would be incentive-based. So for those 2 reasons alone, we introduced the FAR so that we could measure them. And in practice, we've noticed that the FARs that we had considered initially may be just a tad short of being able to give us the wow factor that we want to see in terms of architectural design. We still have the standards, the height restrictions and the massing restrictions and the setbacks and the open space requirements to give us the envelope and the look that we want for downtown without necessarily jeopardizing that. We can increase the FAR still to give room to the developers to come up with substantial projects. So that's the first piece. The second piece, which is related to the question you asked, Mr. Najarian, has to do with that particular location. That came out of a discussion with the City Council that there was a desire to change the character of the Alex Theater District from that which we had considered originally in the downtown specific plan to allow a little bit more development. That is simply a policy issue for the City Council to give us direction. We'll be happy to go either direction on that one.
I would like, I think the first part of your answer talked about that wow factor, the FAR not being enough to give that wow factor for the architects and designers. That's something I would like to sit down with you and staff and explain that to me and show me how it could work and why it isn't working currently. And that's just that's why I'm a little uncomfortable just, off the bat we're popping it up a point. So.
I'd be happy to, and I think Mr. Loomis has some images in case you'd like to get further into that today to show you a little bit more. Otherwise, we can wait to have that.
We can't get further into that today, but we certainly can have another meeting or a meeting directly with certain council members. Yes, Mr.
Up on that, since we have the staff here, did some of this on the mid-brand around the Alex fall out of discussions we had when Dorn Platts was proposing north of the Alex Theater to keep low elevations, 1 or 2 stories, and then step it up on the Maryland side to get more elevation there? Was this wasn't a part of the fallout from that at all?
No, it was not, because in the case of directly adjacent to the Alex Theater on the Maryland side, the DSP already allows a developer to build up to a maximum of 6 floors. This is actually talking about, the Alex Theater amendment is actually talking about the blocks north of
In other words, keep what the Downtown Pacific plan already says and just extend it to the block north.
That's right. Actually, in the screen, just to clarify this, it's,
Yeah, where the dark brown is.
this is the Alex Theater right here on
Right.
Brand Boulevard. Everything in the pink is currently restricted to 2 to 3 stories under the current downtown specific plan.
So the dark brown, you want to
Just
change
there-
that to pink? So
Actually, what we have proposed is this pink, which is north of California, would be the same standards as what's adjacent to it, which would allow 4 stories up to 6 stories by rights.
By adjacent, where do you mean?
This area right here would change. That's now in the dark purple. Everything south of California to Lexington would be maintained at the 2 to 3 stories, which is the current downtown specific plan standards. That's the block directly around the Alex.
Okay, Mr. Yusefian.
You have a little matrix in here, so somebody can explain this to me as I read it. I have no problem with 1, but I don't have no problem with 2. Let's get to number C. Additional plus or minus 650 residential units for a total of 4,630 units. Explain that to me.
Yes, the original downtown specific plan evaluated just shy of 4,000 units in the downtown as the development capacity. So Amendment C, which would address those areas on the west side of central south side of Colorado, could have under the same methodology that we used originally, potentially increase the capacity by an additional 650. So the total development capacity downtown would be the 4,600 number.
Okay, so
Since the
I'm just trying
4,600
to understand your
The
matrix.
global total.
Okay, so if we go with D, there's an addition of 220.
Right.
So if we just did D, we did not do C, there will be a total of 4,200,
Correct.
okay? Then it says amendments, additional 870 residential units for a total of 4,850. Where does that 870 come from?
The 870 is if you combine Amendment C and D together.
I see.
And
That's
so
how
as
it
it
goes.
moved through to E and F, the parenthetical is a kind of cumulative adding of each one of these amendments together so you can understand the potential impacts of doing all of them at the same time.
I have one issue that I have is with C. C talks about going in areas that are not part of the downtown specific plan, and it says when 50% is straddling somewhere else. Now, on the west side of Central, there are some properties that are adjacent to multifamily immediately. Now, that is not a part of the original redevelopment area. So it was always a 6-story. Now, that's supposed to be a buffer to unlimited height at one point, which we brought it down. So if you are, wouldn't that give a reason for someone to go out and buy some of the multifamilies next door and say that, I have a piece of property on Central, and I own a couple of multifamilies next to it, but my multifamilies combined is less than 50%, and the rest of the site is on Central. Why don't you give me the same entitlement on the other side? And wouldn't that kind of start moving the kind of encroachment into the multifamilies, and you kind of narrow the front facade?
That would potentially give the incentive for people to exactly what you just said. However, it would be limited in 2 different ways. One is that still only up to 50% of the proposed project, as long as up to 50% of the proposed project is in the existing current downtown specific plan boundaries, then they could qualify. In other words, they would be limited to how much they would encroach. Second, we already have in the downtown specific plan standards for proposed new projects adjacent to multifamily neighborhoods so that they'll be, still you have the discretionary review authority to take a look at those projects and make sure that the design is consistent and compatible with the existing neighborhoods.
How would you do that? On one side of Central, on Central, it's 6 stories.
Correct.
Okay? Right past the commercial property is multifamilies, and you could see that you have it on different color, I'm assuming. That's what you're talking about, that area, right?
Right.
Okay.
I think it's affected.
Okay, so,
This area.
right. So all of those, not all of them, but there's some of them that are multifamily. Some of them are just right now commercial. They're actually being used, and some of them are just vacant lots. Okay. Why would I put 2 or 3 lots on Central together to have a viable project when I can go buy a piece of property on Central, which is the expensive property because it's 6-story by right, and then go buy a couple of units on the back, which is much less expensive because it's multifamily. Make sure that I buy a 20,000 square feet in the front, buy another 20,000 square feet in the back, and say, you know what, it's 50% of what the front is, I would like to have the 6-story in the back. Then you come to council, and how do I deal with the other properties behind the other multifamilies? Because all of a sudden, that 6-story is going to be next to the other ones. How do you deal with that?
I think I hear 2 different parts to your question. One is, would that give a greater incentive to certain developers to use the multifamily properties next door, as opposed to try to assemble multifamily properties next door, as opposed to the existing properties within the existing boundaries?
On Central.
That I do not have a really good answer for that. That is actually a policy question. That if that trade-off is worth consideration by the City Council. The reason that we proposed it was that we actually had a real case that you reviewed, or you actually got updated on, which was 301 North Central.
Right.
That was such a project. So dealing with that project gave us the experience to say, well, maybe we could, without trying to change the boundary completely, we could give an opportunity for the City Council to consider such projects in the future. So that's a policy issue. The second piece is, again, do you necessarily have to have up to 6 stories if you encroach into the multifamily residential? I would say no, because the downtown specific plan gives the City Council the authority to actually impose higher standards to be respectful of the multifamily residential next door.
And what is that? I mean, what do you do currently, the way the code is? And I remember the 301 project very clearly, and the designer is actually sitting in the audience. What they did is they designed a 6-story building on one side, on the on Central side. As they went into the multifamily, they kind of stepped it down into 2-story or 3-story to kind of match what's right next to it. It kind of blends in. Now, is that what they're going to end up having?
Well,
Or if you're increasing this, would they be able to put the increase on the FAR that's on the multifamily size and transpose it on the Central, so now instead of having 6 stories, now you have 8 stories? How does that work?
No, they would not be necessarily required to transpose the FAR to one side. However, not strictly by code language as we're proposing, although we could do that. What we're proposing is that they would be able to look at the mix of uses that they would want to put on the overall project, and then so they have the flexibility in terms of how they want to program their uses. However, their design would still have to be respectful of the way that the project actually encroaches into the multifamily residential. That language is already in the downtown specific plan.
Mr. Mayor, my issue with this one is, and I'll be honest with you, with also the other ones, is these have a major impact, in all due respect to all of my friends, all the developer friends and foes. There is a big impact in here. It has not been hashed out. We have not discussed this. I do not have a clear understanding of it, and I'm a contractor by trade, and I'm still trying to figure out how you're going to do this thing. It's very ambiguous to me, and we went through many study sessions to the downtown specific plan. I understood what's happening on Brand Boulevard, north of California. That's pretty self-explanatory numbers over here. The design and how you do this when you encroach into multifamily neighborhood and so on and so forth, that's very ambiguous to me. I do not understand it. I do not understand also the ramifications of the FAR overall at 1%.
Okay, may I just ask a question of you, Mr. Councilmember Yusefian? Since we already have a request existent asking for some clarification on any increase in FAR before we go there, can we incorporate this at that time? Since what you're asking is for more clarification, and I'm looking...
A and B, they can bring an ordinance tomorrow and I'll vote for it. It's pretty easy to understand. The rest of them, I think we need to have a little bit of a study session to kind of hash it out.
The point is that we're not voting on an ordinance. We're merely starting a process, which will be coming back, as I know you know. But what I'm going to suggest is, since Councilmember Najarian has already requested some interaction between at least himself and I maybe expand it to the whole council on this very issue.
C, D, E, and F.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
And that's fine, but I think in fairness to the public, we need to also do something so the public can understand what we're talking about.
Well, that is what we're talking about. It would not be done in secret. It would be here on the dais.
Right.
All right.
More C, D, E, F.
Okay. But before we... Pardon me?
We're giving direction here tonight, right?
I believe what we're doing is it's a... Actually, several of my colleagues have asked Mr. Hagani, so why don't you mention again, as you did at the top, exactly what it is you're looking...
We're asking for your direction to initiate the process to do an amendment to the downtown specific plan, which would trigger several amendments, and then and we've given you options to how far you would like to initiate this process. And again, as you said, Mr. Mayor, it would just to be initiating it, and at this point we don't have a code language prepared. Once we develop that code language based on your direction, we can bring it up for further discussion.
All right. I'd like to weigh in before we go to get more and more comments. I haven't had the opportunity to. I'm fine with item A. Item B, I have a couple of questions. How did we get to a point where we said it was only a ground floor that could be used? Last night before I came, I looked at the replay of the meeting. There was no mention of strictly limiting it to a ground floor. For example, suppose a developer came in and wanted to build something there and wanted to put an exhibit space in the penthouse, or exhibit space on the third floor, or some other design as a means of marketing their say it's even a residential, an apartment house, to make it a premier rental where they could get a higher rental for that reason. Perhaps it becomes a professional building or something like that. They wouldn't be able to take advantage of this. So what was the reasoning as to why it could only be a first floor?
That was the impression we were left with. We do not have an attachment to that. I do know of spaces such as on the higher floors in Manhattan that are wonderful exhibit spaces.
You don't have to go that far. You can go to downtown LA.
And that is not an issue that we are attached to either way.
Okay. That would be one comment. Secondly, there was something I got lost in the language here on item B, so let me read it and I'll stop where I come to a little bit of confusion. I think I know what you mean, but I think something dropped out somewhere. It says the DSP includes incentives in the form of height and density bonuses to encourage desirable uses and features such as affordable housing, hotels, additional public open space, and sustainable design. The proposed amendment will add museum, art gallery, and or exhibit spaces, and that's in quotes, to the list of uses that result in a height/density bonus, provided the exhibit space is at the ground level. The height bonus will be one additional story up to 15 feet, and I already have a question about that I've mentioned. The density bonus not to be included in FAR calculations. Performing arts uses because of their unique parking requirements, will be specifically excluded from this benefit. This benefit meaning what?
The incentive, the bonus that would be resulted for these particular uses. So in other words, the particular uses that would be subject to that incentive would only be the 3 uses, and that would not, and it would not include performing arts, which tend to have assembly uses connected to them.
Okay, thank you. And then over on item E, I had a question about the FAR, because most of those properties, or I shouldn't say most, but many of those properties are under an acre. I understand it. And I assume that's part of the question that the speaker was bringing up about increasing the FAR to 4 to make them pencil out. But I won't go much further, because we had yet another speaker that asked for a 1 point increase sort of across the board. If we're going to come back with that item anyway, I won't go any further with that. But I do have some questions about that. Let me see. Yeah, I won't go any further with that, because we have a request from at least 2 council members that want to go into items C, D, E, and F, basically everything but A and B, in a little more detail. But my last question to you is this. This will be coming back to us, correct? In other words, all we're doing is initiating the process. So it doesn't mean that if we initiate A, B, C, D, E, and F, that A, B, C, D, E, and F will ultimately be included as stands, correct?
What it would mean that all of that would be, we would start on working on those, and we would give you an update very quickly to see what level of work you would be required to do.
Okay, so then we do absolutely need something specifically segregated for this. Mr. City Manager?
No, well, I think you've arrived at the same conclusion. I think it's safe to say that if you want to delve further into C, D, E, and F before they start doing work, including the CEQA evaluation, we should stop here and do a study session at some point before we move any further.
Well, let me say that I am, in general, in agreement with everything that is here, with the clarifications you've given me, with the exception of, and that is A through F, by the way, with the exception of the exhibit space being specifically on ground floor level. With the change, other than that, I support A, B, C, D, E, and F, with the exception of that issue and the idea of increasing the FAR up to a set limit across the board. So it sounds to me, if I heard correctly, and maybe you're keeping score better than I, sounded like Mr. Weaver was in favor of mostly what he saw here. Mr. Quintero seemed to be in favor of what he saw here. Councilman, he may have something more to add.
Yeah.
Councilmember Najarian and Councilmember Yusefian wanted more input on C, D, E, and F.
Yeah, I'm prepared to take the next step on A and B, the incentives, the cleanup, but I think we need to flesh out C, D, E, and F.
So it sounds like we have a consensus there, Mr. Hagani. Yes, Mr. Weaver.
You raised an interesting question on where you would put the art location, because there might be a developer that would decide to put it on the penthouse or some other location. So giving them the biggest range of options to do it makes a lot of sense. So with that change, yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, and so, Mr. Yusefian.
If my colleagues take an opportunity, if our city attorney can move his head, thank you very much.
No, just your head, he said.
Yeah, just your head. You could see that kind of a nice mocha color that it's on the bottom. So it's not just on Central. Apparently, I'm getting this accurately.
Colorado.
All the way, it's on the bottom part of the Colorado, and it goes on the other side, the mocha color. You could see some more mocha color on the other side, on the right, on the left, on top, and also next to that dark brown, there's a mocha color there too. So my question now from the city attorney, you can come back now. We have seen all the mocha color ones. Aren't we, through this procedure, going about rezoning those to a different because we're changing the density?
Yes, I mean, essentially, that's what part...
So
what-
that is a zone change to an
essentially.
extent.
Yeah, not to extent it is.
So
Those
this is,
changes are
so
made.
you need 4 votes for those. And furthermore, to do a zone change, do we require, because these were outside of the downtown specific area, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would those require noticing? Sorry, I got to bring the noticing out. Would
Yeah.
they require noticing?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and so my thing is, I think before we go out there and do all this stuff, at least I would like to understand what is it we're doing
No, I
there.
think that's exactly what everybody has said, Mr. Yusefian.
And-
We agree with you.
And maybe we
That's
let the
what-
people know.
That's what Mr. Najarian asked before you spoke, and you agree with that, and I think at least 2 other colleagues do. So let's do that. I would suggest that perhaps we wait on this until we do that. I mean, I think the language cleanup is something that is not time-consuming, and I think the issue, I think I'm the only one that had an issue in item B, which Mr. Weaver agrees with, and perhaps my other colleagues do as well.
And I don't have a problem, they just need to bring the language back.
So why don't, rather than go forward with A and B, why don't we bring this back, and we'll do it at a time where we can have a mini study session. I know I hate to use that word, those words, study slash...
This is important.
A lot more power, please.
No PowerPoints involved. You can act them out, but no PowerPoints involved. And we'll get some more input from the public on it.
Puppets are allowed.
One last
All
thing,
right.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
When you come back to us, guys, would you bring us some of these in color, but not 8.5 by 11, 11 by 17, so we can actually see? Because what you gave us had nothing, and
Consider our age.
and I was trying to relate everything accurately. The shades would help us a lot.
We'll be happy to bring any images or visual aids that will help to convey the information.
Thank you.
Some of us were 3 or 4 years younger a year ago, Mr. Yusefian, so,
A year ago.
yeah.
So did
All right, thank you, Mr. Pagani. Do we have a
motion to adjourn? So moved.
Second.
Thank you, we're...
And for redevelopment?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Redevelopment's adjourned.
Thank you.